just tweeted. So I am not praying for the success of Apple Podcast. They took Flip the stock market down, and I emailed them a bunch of times. I finally got an email back, and it's over like this artwork thing that you don't have the ability to re-edit, so I might have to redo the whole thing again. Fun.
We're gonna get there.
That's like scoring like a touchdown with 10 seconds left in the fourth quarter in the Super Bowl, and then they call it back. That's what that felt like. That's what that felt like.
I will say, Steve Jobs was an Aeon though. You just didn't know it yet. And every time I'm like a Jobs stan, and every time I go back and listen to like a speech or what have you that he had, everything is so SPX coded. I'm like, man, only I could chill this guy in the replies.
Dude, I just feel like they have failed to innovate now. Yeah,
I mean they're very far on the right side of the S curve.
Yeah. All right. We got. Oops. Dude, 6.9 days of a straight space. What's the over under that? Elon doesn't pull an Elon and just rug the space 3 days in,
Yeah, I figure that space will get rugged. I don't see how it wouldn't, considering like a couple hour spaces get rugged.
Yeah, Cal, maybe we will keep you off that one just in case.
Dude, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know who I made angry.
Dude, I don't know either.
We have problems with all of us for whatever reason.
Yeah.
We don't grift enough or something.
Speaking of grift, do you see the new pump fund creator capital markets?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, there's so many intricacies now to like there's so much forced tailwind, in my opinion, to keep the Ponzi going that I'm kind of just, I don't know, I kind of stopped. I don't really care that much, to be honest. So I don't know all the details, but I saw like the table of creator fees.
It's just so funny how many have accidentally rugged already right out of the gate 2 days in. Couple big names had some whoopsies.
Yeah. Maybe, I've only had 10 years in this industry, but I slipped. Yeah, I mean, show me the incentives and I'll show you the outcome kind of thing, right?
Yeah. No, that's for sure. Let me.
Cryptic, did you ever look into like the pump fund streams and if like we could link SPX somehow to that?
So you can't link it. You would have to launch its own coin. And I've been like thinking about it a ton just because there's such a lack of like personality on that platform, but I just don't know how we would be able to ethically do it. You know what I'm saying? I don't know. Like, even if we launched it and said none of us are going to buy the token, and because what's cool is you could create like fees, like a revenue stream, and we could just make a public wallet where the revenue stream just buys SPX, like swaps whatever they pay you and right into SPX. And I would just go on there and talk about how you should leave the trenches. And I would go talk to other streamers and tell them how they should buy SPX. Like, it would just be a troll. It would be really funny. But I just don't know, aside from that, like the coins perform, like how that would work. You know what I mean?
I'm not sure how this would technically work, but I'm sure, I would assume there's a way to kind of create a token that just funnels into like SPX buys.
Yeah.
Yeah, like a permanent swap.
Yeah, there's definitely a way, like if we sat down and figured out how to create like the right incentive alignment, it could be pretty cool. And then you could maybe use it as like a treasury or something, Monge or what have you. I think there's got to be ways to do that.
I'll take the other side of this. I'm skeptical on these types of things.
Yeah, no, it's fair.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think anyone here is like real bullish on it. And I would set it up to try to go back into Mike's wallet. I would try to use all that to get Mike whole.
You just have to be turbo transparent in the sense that like whatever, like in my eyes at least, like wallets are known. It's very clear kind of like what's going where. And then you kind of set all that out with intention ahead of time. I think in that case it could work, but I agree, Matt, like there's definitely still risk in it. And optically, like it is like kind of the other, I know infiltrate everything is the philosophy, but also like it's such a different realm of crypto.
Yeah, I think like there's other interesting ways to create syncs that don't involve like other tokens.
Yeah,
you know?
fair.
Yeah,
you're right. It's a slippery.
The average like pump fund like buyer probably isn't our target demographic either. So
Yeah. Like I just wouldn't want people buying other tokens and then like, having some sort of expectation around them and then it doesn't materialize. Yeah. It's like, this actually feeds into our conversation today, which is like, about the history of money. And we've talked about this in the past a lot, but, the foundation of money is trust. And so introducing things that in any way, shape or form, like compromise trust is just, it's a dangerous game to me.
Agreed.
No, that's fair. Oh, you know what I wanted to say real fast? Did you see the Aeon's sister, that the pool player, the world ranked pool player? So why that's really interesting that no one really knows is Joe Rogan's favorite sport is billiards. I've been listening to him for 11 years.
I think it's really cool that the two athletes that have done sponsorships with SPX both happen to be world champions.
Yeah, super cool.
Like that's amazing.
You said that yesterday, right, Matt? Like it's the Champions one.
Yeah.
Champion.
Like she has like a SP, like he watches billiards. So like if she had like a really cool SPX shirt on while she's just winning world championships. And he goes, "What's SPX 6900?" Just says it on a podcast.
I think we should only sponsor world champion.
Yeah,
I like that.
This is the standard.
That's the floor.
Yeah. I mean, marketing's like it's a game of just kind of like, getting as much range as you can for as long as you can, like across as many mediums. So something will penetrate the zeitgeist. Like it's just a matter of everyone kind of turning the gear up as much as they can across as many different facets as possible.
I love seeing all the Reddit stuff.
Yeah. I agree.
Like watching the Aeons just go. It's like D-Day, they're just going out there to get their accounts suspended.
I gotta give it's Jeffrey Banks.
Yeah.
Right? He's like the leader of the tribe.
He's really funny, man.
Next man up.
That's it.
Jamari, and there's some others that have been going really hard, which has been great. Like I mean, you have to be. That's how you know that like SPX is destined, because to basically be creating new accounts to go and like try to raid people on Reddit is like a next level dedication, because they are not kind to that generally. Yeah. They will silence people.
But it's like a video game, you got to figure out how to beat it.
It is, yeah, 100%. It's an MMORPG.
Yeah.
It's amazing how we have spaces like pretty much every day now.
Yeah.
I'm excited for the world record spaces too.
For sure.
It'll be fun.
Yeah, that's going to be fun to participate in too. Like just being in that chat, they got a lot going on. Like I saw this morning, they were like, we're going to do a girls one. Like, it's just funny. Country ones, music ones. I think it'll be cool because it'll show like the breadth of the SPX community. I think that's something that we have that's super special. Is it's not just all the same person. And I think that's important because that expands the reach, right? Like Murad's talked about that. You have all these different like pockets inside the community. And I think that's super bullish. You want that. You want, you don't have to appeal to one person, like one pocket of the SPX community, or whether it's spiritual, esoteric, just like the GME side. Like it has a broad appeal.
Totally. That's what's amazing about SPX is that it's so multifaceted that it can just attract like a wide range of different kind of personality types, and they can each contribute in whichever way they want, where you can't really do that with something so static, like, you know, like a cat or a dog or the typical kind of meme coin that you think of.
Yeah.
I know if we have, I just saw a comment in here. It says y'all should ban the guy shilling hashtag Murad on our Reddit. So is Reddit similar to Telegram and stuff, where you have, you know, like admins and stuff like that?
There are mods. I don't know who the mods are in the r/SPX 6900. But there are mods, and there is like a hierarchy of control similar to TG. So we should be able to do something. I just don't know who those people are, if it's the same as TG or what have you. This is a really good idea I just saw in the comments. Go on IG and interact with the angry comments. The world is ending edits. Gets interactions every time. That's true. That is true. And that is like, also, I mean, those people, it's kind of like perfectly Aeon-esque, I guess, because that is, you know, like bringing positivity to what is now like 80% of content, which is that, is like so in line with our ethos. That's a great call.
Are we still waiting for people to roll in, or you guys
I can kick it off.
Let's do it.
All right. So what's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Flip the Stock Market. I recommend everybody does their own individual research on money throughout history, because it'll help you conceptualize the historical relevance, elegance, and simplicity we're trying to achieve with SPX 6900. The common thread in all currencies throughout history, whether they were units of account, units of exchange, metal coins, paper bills, or even blockchain technology, wasn't a value anchoring utility mechanism. It wasn't an enforceable rule of law, and it wasn't provision of state institution, monarchy, or aristocracy. You can call the common thread a few different words, but they all mean essentially the same thing. You can call it faith, you can call it belief, or you can call it trust. And if you can develop that within a community, you can trade paper for gold, you can trade software bits for a skyscraper in New York, or you can trade a meme coin into a globally accepted unit of exchange. So that's how I'll kick it off.
Love that. It's kind of crazy when you say it like that, right? Like you trade a couple software bits for a skyscraper. You know, like. Yeah.
Do you guys mind if I just to kick it off, do you mind if I share like my screen for something that will illustrate via graphic? Yeah. Okay. Awesome. I've never done this before on hold on. There we go. Okay. So this is like maybe a little bit blurry, but I thought that this was, when I was looking at like just timelines of money in general, I thought that this was kind of like the most interesting, and also like I don't know, there's some you know, there's me in the upper right, and then there's like some interesting kind of fun facts in the middle. But you know, I think there was a podcast that like really stuck with me about just kind of like the origins of Bitcoin that, you know, I listened to recently, and I've been listening to a lot of like kind of original, like just kind of early Bitcoin maxi people who were kind of having revelations and call it the mid 2010s type of content. And I think there's like a lot of application for SPX in there. But, you know, it's interesting because money as a concept and currency as a concept is realistically just like consensus reality. And what that means is like, or at least, you know, from my point of view, but I think we'd all agree. And what that means is like, it's because there's a collective, you know, acceptance of something, it becomes a truth, like an objective truth. But realistically, the original anchor for that truth is really more of just like a seeping into society, that whatever has been accepted is you know, the de facto kind of way to do things. And so like I think this is probably the best example I've seen of how that's changed over time. And I think there are two like very important and interesting things to note here. I think the first is like we've clearly gone from more physical more tangible in real life units of account and exchange to much less so tangible and physical in real life units of account and exchange, which I think is generally like a good thing, and allows for much more accessibility and kind of transparency and a lot of other things. And number two, there's clearly been a shift in definitely like the latter half there into a more decentralized and less like centralized in terms of control approach to currency, which I think we're really in like the early stages of adoption. I mean, 2008, obviously, like crypto has been around a long time for our concept of time, but in general, it obviously has not. And to me, that shows like two things. It shows that people in general want some medium of exchange that is not controlled by a centralized entity that may or may not have your best interests at heart, or certainly has their own agenda and incentives. And number two, that there is kind of a world of potential that exists within kind of the broader scope of currency that is likely to change or adapt. And I think a lot of people have a hard time reckoning with that because it's a very like monumental and consequential thing when you start to think about it. But if you look at the last two entries on this, or even 3 or 4, if you really zoom out, you can see like change is very much so accelerating, and the time from A to B to C to D on the latter half of this is getting shorter and shorter and shorter. So yeah, I guess that's like how was my initial framing for this conversation.
Yeah, I'm happy to dive in because I spent a lot of time early on when I first got into Bitcoin, like studying the history of money, reading all the books. And I won't even like bore you with like the historical details because I'm more interested in studying currencies or forms of money historically from the perspective of what are the common factors across them that have allowed them to succeed or fail. And so it's clear to me that belief is kind of the starting point. Belief reinforced by trust and measured by lindiness or network effects over time matters a lot for their success. And they fail in one form or another when these things are lost. And so like as Tan's mentioned, currencies have 3 primary roles: medium of exchange, unit of account, and store of value. And right now, like when I look at the current context, it's abundantly clear to me that fiat currencies are failing on the last dimension, which creates a void. So I still think fiat currencies actually are more complementary to like different types of store value assets like Bitcoin than people perceive, because I think they can still play a role as a medium of exchange or unit of account. But if they're not satisfying the last piece of the puzzle, like this is kind of where they fail. And we see evidence of that right now, because this is why everything is basically one gigantic short dollar trade. If you look at the world, like you see it in the price of assets all over the place: Bitcoin, real estate, gold, the stock market. Essentially, people are abandoning fiat and saying, we don't want to save in fiat anymore. And if you think about it like more practically on a micro level, like just log into your Chase bank account and look at the savings rate, and it's like 1 basis point. So this is not generally a good savings mechanism anymore. And I think like we're seeing the market reinforce that through essentially fleeing fiat currencies and moving into risk assets or supply constrained assets more broadly. But what I think is really interesting in the context of SPX and crypto in general is free market, bottom up, globally accessible currencies, which people can coordinate around on the internet, have only been possible in the last 15 years thanks to Bitcoin. So, and also to give credit where it's due, honestly, thanks to policymakers' willingness to permit these new technologies more openly now. So, if they were to shut these types of innovations down, I think they would still probably happen, but it would be much more difficult. But the fact that policymakers are generally leaning more towards openness to the development of these new types of assets and technologies, I think this is like a really, really good thing and a paradigm shifting thing. So in my view, this is the beginning of an era, not the end of an era. And if you think about other asset classes like the stock market or the real estate market or the bond market, and you were in those asset classes like 10 or 15 years into their inception, and you look at them like 50 years later, like, damn, you would have wanted to be participating at that early point in their trajectory. And it's also kind of crazy to think that up until this point, we have basically been given a choice between an analog decentralized currency, which is gold or silver, and then top-down issued currencies by government monopolies or oligopolies. And like this is kind of crazy to me, because this is like almost if you think about it from a free market perspective, like currencies are a social technology, and so a free market, the same way free markets exist around more like traditional technologies, free markets should probably exist around, it would probably be a good thing if free markets existed around social technologies like currencies as well. And this is like just the beginning of this era where this might be possible, that we might see free market currencies that people attach different, values to might proliferate, because currencies imposed on hundreds of millions of people or billions of people are not one size fits all solutions. And so they might have some level of values alignment from the perspective of, okay, yeah, I could say my values generally align more with, say, the US dollar than the renminbi. But there's a whole bunch of missing pieces of the puzzle that the US dollar is like not meeting, or values or needs along for a lot of people that those currencies are servicing, that if you open up the market and created this sort of free market mechanism for people to create different types of forms of money or currencies that to meet those needs, that generally seems like a good thing. So, I mean, currencies are really in service to the people or an economy. And when they no longer meet that need for large groups of people and there's an alternative, now, just for the first time, again, in the last 15 years, people have a free market mechanism to attach their values to, and to essentially have like democratic referendums. So for the first time, we can use assets as essentially inter-period, like in between elections, like referendum mechanisms to essentially like attach value and protest to the powers that be, like, what you're doing in terms of your management of the currency is not doing its job. And I think this is like a really, really, really good thing. So most of these currencies, like, they'll be held by people who would rather hold them than participate in the alternatives, or they'll be held by people who recognize a latent set of values in society that they believe is deeply underappreciated. And then these assets give people an opportunity to sort of rebalance or disrupt power structures in new ways. So yeah, I'll kind of leave it at that and let anyone else chime in. But I looked at, when I went through my research on this, I looked at it more from a conceptual angle of like what has allowed currencies to flourish and succeed historically. And then what do you need to see in new currencies on a going forward basis to continue to succeed? But also, like, why has the paradigm changed in the last 15 years?
Yeah. I just to add one thing really quickly, and then I'm sorry, I'll stop yapping. I totally agree with you. I think that blockchain's enabling like a way to kind of vote for alternatives in the form of currency, or it could be via investment, whatever kind of financial means their intention is, or kind of is behind their intention, is like an innovation we like probably no one here has fully wrapped their head around. And I agree. I would almost wager too that Bitcoin as an innovation obviously was the kind of initial kind of breakthrough, but ETH and more programmable L1s and N2s, I guess to some extent too, have offered kind of like a deeper rabbit hole for the average participant, and also are really newer in terms of like, I guess, acceptance as a technology. And so, I would even wager that we're 5 years into this, 6, 7, depending on your view of the adoption curve. And when you think about the real total addressable market, it's massive. And so, I think you can get even more nuance there and wager that we're earlier if you go beyond Bitcoin as like as a cryptocurrency.
Yeah, and I think in this new construct, something that's also underappreciated is you don't have to adopt the currency or be like a believer in the currency for the currency to succeed. So long as a sufficiently large group of people attach their values and beliefs to this thing, and an economy forms and develops around it, these things can still succeed and have a role in society. And so I think a lot of people like start with the view of like, well, what's my view of the world? And what you should actually do is spend some time understanding around this particular asset or cryptocurrency. Is there a group of people with a very deep set of beliefs that is at critical mass, that is continuing to grow, that is continuing to support the kind of like growth and trajectory of this new form of currency? And like, that's what I see with SPX. Like, that was one of the things in the early days. I was like, all right, like, let me throw all my views out the window and just observe this as a social phenomenon and see what is happening here and try to understand and measure the depth of belief here. And, at a certain point, like you have to almost capitulate. And I think that's what happened with Bitcoin in a lot of ways. Like Naval had this tweet that I liked. It was like, if you want to start a new cryptocurrency, form a religion around it where the core tenet is to hold forever until all the unbelievers are forced to believe. And
yeah,
this is kind of like one of the things
that
we happening here with not just SPX, because like it would be myopic for me to believe that dynamic is only playing out in SPX, though I think that's like the most interesting place it's playing out. There are other pockets of the market where this is playing out in different ways as well. And I think this is what a lot of people miss when they're scratching their heads about like, well, why did Dogecoin go to $100 billion? Or why did XRP go to $300 billion? Or why did ADA go to, whatever it went to? And they're not understanding that there is a social phenomenon, an economic machine that is being built around these people that congregate, transact with one another, and form a community with one another for whatever reasons they want. And like, you have to be honest about that.
Yeah, the way that I look at it is that there's two trust points to make a currency successful. And one of those trust points is the people or the group or the nation that administers the currency. You have to trust that they're not going to inflate it, that they're not going to devalue that currency in whichever way they may do that. And then the other trust point is the community, and you have to rely that the community attaches belief and value to the currency. And when either one of those trust points are off, you have this imbalancing effect. And I think we can look at that objectively, like through the US dollar, for one, is that there's still sort of this trust within the community of people who use dollars, but it's kind of being corroded by the administrators of the currency. And then when you look at something like Bitcoin or cryptocurrency in general, that third party that sort of, you could say like administered the currency is just technology. And so then when you have a crypto, you can kind of outsource that trust to the tech, and as long as it's like sufficient decentralized technology, then you can have faith in that aspect. But the other aspect that you need to have faith in is the community behind that currency. So it's like there's a lot of cryptocurrencies that the tech is fine, right? It's sufficient. So what is the thing that you need to focus on if you already have trust on the technology side is the community side. So I think that's what we're really solving for here with SPX. And as you guys know, it can be seen objectively through the on-chain metrics that the community is as Matt has stated before, they're doing what they said they were going to do.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, Tens. And to me, The most interesting opportunity in the market right now is to try to identify the next cryptocurrencies. If you're a believer that more cryptocurrencies are going to flourish in this new paradigm and new construct, your job should be to find the next generation cryptocurrencies before they cross the trust chasm, like right before everyone else realizes that you can trust them. This is the most asymmetric bet out there right now, because the TAM for cryptocurrencies is global. Every single person in the world is in the market for a savings mechanism. And I am of the belief that there will be several of these things, that the Bitcoin is still an amazing asset. You want to hold this asset, in my opinion, for a very long period of time, if not indefinitely. But there are generational divergences where Bitcoin is not meeting the needs from a currency perspective or a wealth creation perspective for a large cohort of the population right now. And so they're out there, like, you don't even listen to me, like go out there and like look at the dots and connect the dots. They're out there looking to create this type of thing. If you make it your job to find the things that you think can cross the chasm, which are very, very few, and you are correct in your judgment of that ahead of time, this is the most asymmetric investment opportunity you could be pursuing in the world right now, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think one thing I've seen is some people have been like posting charts of like the Bitcoin searches on Google, and like ascertaining that, okay, like the searches need to kind of skyrocket for us to like indicate that we're in this kind of euphoria period. But I think one good counterpoint that I saw was that most people, they've heard of Bitcoin already. They know the name. They don't need to like go search it on Google. So then like, what's the reason why they're not necessarily attracted to it? Is because I think a lot of them believe that the opportunity has been largely diminished. And just going back to what Matt says, there is this need for something else where they can still see like a significant opportunity there, and it's portraying the same kind of diamond-handed characteristics that Bitcoin has shown, which is just essentially building trust within the community.
And when the valuation gap between, say, like Bitcoin and everything else gets wide, like Bitcoin's what, a $2.3 trillion asset right now. When this gap gets wide, in the construct of what I mentioned, which is like, okay, the last 15 years is the first time in history that we can have a free market for competitive cryptocurrencies. So what the market is going to do is they're going to look at that valuation delta and say, okay, there's a thing out there that like won, and it's $2.3 trillion. Like, shouldn't we try to do it again? Like, shouldn't we try to compete in the free market for cryptocurrencies? And I view this as like the same thing as like, a founder in Silicon Valley saying, after Facebook was wildly successful, saying, hey, I could just go join Facebook as like a high-level executive or an engineer, and I could participate in that, and I could do pretty well. Or I could try to do something more competitive and create the next, create Instagram or Snapchat or TikTok or what have you. And I think the fact that there are these like free market dynamics around currencies for the first time in history, we haven't even seen that play out yet, like at all. And I think people are, I think it's worth thinking about pretty deeply that like this is a possibility that people are going to be trying to do this, competing on this dimension. It's very, very difficult to do the things that Bitcoin did. You have to earn trust. There's no easy way to get there. But if the pie is large enough, there will be a big group of people who will compete on this dimension and be very, very serious about it. So that's what I see with SPX as well.
Yeah, I totally agree. So when I was doing this research, one thing that was funny was you could go all the way back to Marco Polo in the 13th century, talking about the Yuan dynasty and how they had this paper currency and it blew his mind. And the whole idea there was it was too heavy to carry the coins, right? So to expand trade, to grow geographically, you do this paper currency and it's tied back to some type of, it was all metal reserves back then. That one failed because they printed too much money. And then in Cow's graph, it said like the first European one was, it was in Sweden. It was called the Stockholm Banco. It was in 1661. Pretty much like a half fiat currency based on copper and silver. Same thing happened. Overissued, went to zero. After that, Bank of England, 1694. They create one. Same thing happens. Partially based fiat, overprint the money, lose the trust, goes to zero. And I think what you're seeing now in America with this administration becoming pro-crypto is they've kind of accepted that they've overprinted, they've devalued the currency, and it's going to go to zero unless they try to do some type of pivot, right? Because I thought it was interesting when Trump became president this time around, how pro-crypto he was compared to his first administration. He was anti-crypto. And I think what that was COVID was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back. You know, we were a completely fiat currency, right? We have been since 1971 when Nixon took us off the gold standard. So our dollar is just based on the faith of the U.S. government. And I would say they have done a great job proving to be untrustworthy over the last 50 years, right? And so then you print all this money, you send inflation through the roof, and people lost trust. People are losing trust. And I think it's all divine timing in a lot of ways, because if they didn't do that, if actual inflation, we'll call it purchasing power, right? So people don't think that if purchasing power stayed strong, which it hasn't, right? It's been going down since 1913, right? I think since 1913, the purchasing power of the dollar is at 3% of what it was. So you have gone long enough without the trust of the people that they are looking for different avenues. And now, Cal mentioned the adoption curve. I just think we are so much further along the adoption curve than just 5 year last cycle, just so much further along. And then you add on the fact that this money really is been declining so much. And what you get is these avenues that we're talking about, where people are looking for a savings mechanism, anything outside of the dollar, because they have no trust anymore. And that's why I think that you see a pro-crypto administration this time, is because they are going to try to bootstrap the dollar to crypto now to try to save it.
Yeah, I think you're seeing a massive shift into people moving into what I would call like the opt out of the system portfolio at different degrees on the risk spectrum. So gold, silver, Bitcoin, gold and silver being two physical assets, Bitcoin, Ethereum on like the more mature end of the crypto curve, and then things like SPX on like the more early stage end of the curve are, this is kind of like what the opt out of the system portfolio looks like to me. And I think different people have to play the opt out of the system portfolio in different ways. If you have wealth already and you're trying to preserve that wealth and you're opting out of the system because you see the system failing, but you basically made some wealth in the system and you need to preserve that, you're probably going to the more mature end of the curve. You're probably going into Bitcoin, gold, silver, maybe some real estate, things like this. If you are someone, and there's a large group of people in society like this, if you are someone within the system that the system has failed, that doesn't have a tremendous amount of wealth, that is opting out of the system, but opting out of the system not to preserve wealth, but because you're abandoning the system because it didn't help you generate wealth, SPX is an interesting asset on that end of the curve. And so like, even for myself, like I'm a big believer right at this juncture in time right now that this opt out of the system portfolio of like those 4 or 5 assets is kind of where you want to be.
I totally agree with that. I want to make 2 points like the kind of are somewhat sequential to that. I think the first thing is opportunity cost. And there has never been a real option for alternatives for people, but especially not prior to kind of the last, call it 10 to 15 years, where you've seen almost like the retailification of investing, of asset ownership, of all these other things. You go back, it doesn't even have to be that long ago, 30 years ago. How old is the 401k? It's not even that old of a concept, right? And so, I think if you zoom out, you can see a lot of, I guess like early signs of, printing and distrust and like the hedging of a non-centralized institution, alternative for currency via like assets, stocks, alternatives that were kind of poor, ways to express that relative to what we have now. And I think that Bitcoin, and then obviously then, again, programmable chains and the things that you can do on them accelerated an inevitable outcome, which was, I guess, almost like a return to kind of, a permissionless financial vote as to, what, why, and how you want to use a currency, which I think is again, it's a very understated revolution when you think about and extrapolate out like the long-term implications of that. So that's number one, like the kind of ability for people to utilize an uncensorable, immutable alternative has genuinely never existed. And especially one that is more early stage, because, in even like early, like quote unquote, early stage investing 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you have to be an accredited investor, you have to be an LP, you have to use a vehicle to like, and then, you have illiquid funds that are not going to touch anything and have carry and all these other things for, 10-year periods. And that's not accessible for the average person. So these like concepts are extremely new, right? And so that's why I think it feels like such like kind of a cypherpunk thing, but I think there's a lot of inevitable tailwinds that are occurring that are, forcing this outcome out. And it's great that we have a vehicle to do that. And I think the second thing that I wanted to say as a result of that you had mentioned, Matt, I agree. Like, I think we all agree, currency is like a social phenomenon, right? Like there has to be consensus for like a quote unquote trade or an exchange of goods to go through. Both parties have to agree on the value. But, even beyond that, like a currency has to, if you're, I guess selling anything to anyone, like it has to solve a problem, right? It has to be useful in some sense. And obviously there's been a lot of debate as to whether crypto is useful, but like, generally, like that's one of the beauties of kind of peer-to-peer voted upon currencies is that their utility can be anything to anyone, and that there's no longer sort of one option for these things. And so when you think about the problems that are solved, I agree with you. Like when you refer to crypto, it's Bitcoin is now in a different category than say like an SPX, and they solve different problems for different people.
Yes.
Even if Bitcoin does, 10x or 100x in 20 years, that does not, number one, it doesn't solve the problem of someone who is, 22, who is worried about losing like all opportunities to have a career and has $1,000 to their name. Because like you said, the people who have already made wealth, who are looking to preserve it, are then going to benefit from that 100x over 20 years way more than someone who's further.
Yeah, like I was talking to some people about this.
Yep.
I think crypto, in my opinion, in order for crypto to be successful, it needs to continue to reincarnate. If Bitcoin is a one and done thing, I think we have failed to meet the full potential of what cryptocurrency could be as a rebalancing technology that sort of shifts the scales of power and money at times when society gets out of balance, because that is going to be something that progressively and continuously happens over time. And so I think it's like really important as crypto evangelists, believers, proponents, that we have to prove to ourselves and find ways as humans to coordinate in society to continue to do this again. Because if we can't do this again, we're going to run into the same problems 30 years from now with no solutions to these problems. And so we're just kind of like kicking the can down the road. So I think it's really, really important to prove that we can do it again.
Yeah, it's like if you only have Bitcoin and, that becomes the kind of predominant store of value and unit of exchange, then all that really does is it doesn't really change power structures, except in the fact that it kind of transfers them over to a new group of people. And also referencing towards currency's kind of utility factor doesn't only need to be as a unit of exchange or a store of value. I actually have this excerpt here that I'll read out. So anthropologists have noted many cases of primitive societies using what look to Westerners very much like money, but for non-commercial purposes. Indeed, commercial use may have been prohibited. Often such currencies are never used to buy and sell anything at all. Instead, they are used to create, maintain, and otherwise reorganize relationships between people, to arrange marriages, establish the paternity of children, head off feuds, console mourners at funerals, seek forgiveness in the case of crimes, negotiate treaties, and acquire followers. So there's a lot of other utility functions just besides as a unit of exchange or a store of value. And I think that's one thing that like the community and, you know, some leaders of the community and SPX have harped on a lot, is that, you know, conventionally people will say like, okay, like a meme coin has no utility, but the utility is the community. And that's what, you know, that's what's been represented in history, is that people have always seen utility with community. And, you know, like a good thought experiment is like, what's the value of gold, or what's the value of a Bitcoin if you're stranded on an island by yourself? It's not going to have any value. So you basically need a community there that you know recognizes the value in the currency. So that's what I'll say there.
Yeah, I think a community, a critical mass that continues to grow, that reflects a latent set of values or beliefs in society that are like really deep. Like the people will not surrender these beliefs because they feel them so strongly, almost like a religion. And I think this is another thing that makes SPX quite unique, is that there's very strong values alignment within the SPX community across a number of dimensions. I think a lot of people in SPX look at different facets of the world and see a lot of things that are broken. And as an example of this, I think people are asking the question of like, okay, so we agree that fiat currency is failing as a store of value. What can we do? Well, we can buy real estate, or we can buy the stock market, or we can buy individual stocks. And let's take the last one as an example. You know, you can buy individual stocks. You can go out and invest in, you know, some of the tech companies and giants that have come out of Silicon Valley and the West Coast. But I think what's happening within SPX is people are having more of like a values orientation of this. And they're saying, okay, wait, some of these platforms have just built essentially addiction economies or gambling economies. Why are we pouring so much money into these types of solutions or technologies that are like eating up society, and they're not really helping people in any material way? So I think like a lot of people in SPX are more awake to some of these elements, and part of why they're making a conscious choice to allocate here as opposed to other places is like, of course, there's a financial aspect, but there's also this deep values orientation, which is like, no, I'm not participating in allocating capital to things that are predatory towards the vast majority of society, which is manifesting in a lot of these, you know, down only charts that Murad has been showing in his presentations around just like the decline, you know, the doomerism type of stuff.
No, I think you're right about the values have to run deep. They have to be deeply rooted in the community. And because you see it with a lot of these other meme coins, right? They don't have any values. And when you have no values, price action will dictate your community. And if price action dictates your community, you will go to zero every time. Like there has to be, that was what was always so fascinating to me about meme coins is like as just a regular, like just a regular investor, I was like, this is the first time in my experience where you can contribute to investment, not just financially, right? You don't have to be a whale. You don't have to have a ton of money, but you could contribute through posting, through all these, doing all these, making content, and actually increase the value of the investment itself. And I think what that does is it helps generate the community. Like, oh, I don't have to be rich to participate here. And then what that does is that opens up the TAM so much more. And that's how you tap into retail. And I have always said, like, I've always had this belief that this is how you save the working class. If you could just explain to them, you don't need $25,000. You know, like Cal mentioned before, you don't need to be an accredited investor. You know, you don't have to have whatever it is, net worth of $1 million, including your primary residence, all that stuff. You could be a regular person. And I think the way that works is that spans across the globe, like Matt said, and now you become something that's unstoppable. And that's where the power is.
There is a very large silent majority that looks at the world, that looks at the way capital is being allocated and is entirely like disgusted by it. And I think values and purity of SPX and coins like this are things that I think will reveal themselves over time as people continue to earn trust and continue to stand their ground. And people are looking for assets and things to park this dissatisfaction with the rest of the world in. And I think, you know, this all plays into this idea that SPX is like, it's a counterculture. It's a vessel of dissatisfaction. It's a critique. It's a protest against so many things that people are just not satisfied with in the current state of the world.
Yeah. And another thing, I heard Cal mention this yesterday on Pond Talk that I totally agree with. It's like throughout history, revolutions have always had to be violent, right? That's kind of how they always worked. And it's like we are at a point in time where technology is far enough along that the revolution doesn't have to be violent. It could be one with our money, right? And that's what I look at SPX as, is it's this revolution, but it's a revolution of spirituality and like genuine people. And that's special. That's different. That could not exist until right now.
I think to add to that too, like, you know, I posted this like 6 months ago or something, because I just had the thought in the morning when I was thinking about, we've all had like just the early stages of SPX mind virus like occur to us. But I was thinking about how like this was a pre-existing problem that now there's a better solution for, you know, a la GME, Occupy Wall Street, kind of all these other expressions of financial nihilism. And, you know, that's why I think that this like the ability to have alternatives to the traditional system is so important, because it's clear that people have, you know, had like just the wrong battering ram at the door for a long time. They've wanted to express this stuff, but have had no kind of vehicle to do it properly. And the emergence of that, I think, is not only not to be understated, but it's very clear, I think, probably for all of us, and just in general, like, you know, that we are all really passionate about this. Like nobody here and nobody in the general like SPX kind of zeitgeist is going away. Like they're very dedicated to the mission. And when you talk to people in real life, you understand that the problem affects them. You know, like the problem does affect, you know, the 99.5 now, who knows, whatever percent. And as a result, like other people will also be interested in that. And so you then have this kind of comprehensive problem-solving canvas that can do and be all these things to all these people. And, you know, it really kind of blows your mind when you start thinking about it, again, in a similar way to Bitcoin, because you're like, what problems can't this solve? You know, And I also I want to put an asterisk next to that and just note that like I do think that you know that can, if you think too hard about that, it can breed some complacency at times. You know, you still have to you have to solve those problems, and we as like a community and collective have to bring those solutions to the people. Otherwise, you know, it's we can't expect that it will just happen. But it is really a mind-blowing concept that these alternatives now exist, and they solve so many problems that it's almost hard to ascribe like a name to them.
And to draw a cultural analogy from a value orientation standpoint, you know, let's look at the U.S. and like why the U.S. has become so big, so popular, and so dominant. Obviously, a piece of that is, you know, the military power and all that. But what made people want to come here in the first place? And I believe it was because it's this land of freedom, and people kind of bought into that ideal, and that's how it was able to grow. But right now, you know, a lot of people don't necessarily feel that way. They don't feel like you know, whichever country they may be in is kind of supporting their values. So yeah, the way that I look at SPX is it's kind of this like new land of freedom, new land of opportunity. And it is this kind of revolution. Whereas, you know, the US was kind of, you know, a physical revolution, like away from, you know, Great Britain. But SPX is like this digital kind of revolution, like away from the current power structures.
I agree on the physical component too, and I guess to your point, Tans, like, you know, the shift toward digital, I think, is quite important because, you know, to your point about Pawn Talk yesterday, Manj, like that has been true, right? That the majority of kind of like quote unquote revolutions have taken place physically, obviously, but I also think
had
that,
to, right?
What's that?
So they kind of had to, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
There was no alternative option. And that's not to say that, like, you know, that's, I guess, the only means of that kind of expression of angst that exists now. But, you know, I think that Matt's reference of SPX as a Schelling point is one of the most kind of like peaceful forms of protest, when you think about it, that anybody can actually participate in from anywhere at any time, and can also actively contribute to and be a part of. And that is an innovation, tends to the, like what you talked about earlier about like you know, these aren't, I guess, have no utility, the counterpoint to what we all believe. That is an innovation that is, you know, hard to express in terms of numbers, right?
Another thing, completely agree. Another thing I've said like periodically to people over the last couple of months is Aeons are in control. They're in control of their own destiny. There's 211,000 holders at this point and growing. And these are like sort of flow and belief oriented assets, all cryptocurrencies and crypto assets, right? You put your money where your mouth is. And because the size of SPX is so small right now, Aeons really are in control of their own destiny. We find a way to coordinate and step up to the plate and put our money where our mouth is and act accordingly. We can make these types of things happen. And now juxtaposing that with something like Bitcoin, individuals are not in control of Bitcoin at this point. This is another fundamental difference between SPX and Bitcoin. The players that matter in the Bitcoin sphere at this point are institutions and governments and sovereign wealth funds. These are the ones who have the large pools of capital to actually move this thing one way or another. Retail individuals do not have the power anymore. They are passive participants in whatever those players at that stage decide they want to do with Bitcoin. And you still probably do want to be a passive participant in that, because I think there's a lot of good reasons for it. But individuals are not in control. And that's one of the things that with SPX I think is quite unique, is this is at such an early stage. It is so new and novel. it is probably, no one knows what the critical mass number is, explicitly, but at 211,000 holders and growing, we're probably pretty damn close to critical mass, and people have power here. And that in and of itself is a very, very valuable and powerful thing.
Yeah, I think that's I think that's what's so important, to grab the attention of someone like yourself, right? We spoke about this when we talked about Bitcoin, and it's kind of just been stuck in my mind ever since. There's nothing cyberpunk about Bitcoin anymore. It did its job in that sense. It went from an outlier to mainstream, and now, yeah, you have BlackRock, these institutions, these governments, they control most of it. So what do those renegades do, right? What are those people like yourself that started Bitcoin, started early investing on Bitcoin? Where do they go? And I think this is where they come.
I think
not to meme coins, right? To SPX, to specific ones that meet those values.
I think it depends on the type of person. I think some of them will honestly, be happy, find some other interesting project or thing to work on that's intellectually appealing to them, and maybe go to the beach more, or I don't know, go on vacation more. I think other people who are more maybe intrinsically motivated around some deeper mission or purpose feel like the Bitcoin was the beginning of the job, not the end of the job. And that the job is not finished, and Bitcoin did its part, and it did a really, really good part, and it will continue to play its role. But in the way I see this asset class playing out, it's like a relay race, and Bitcoin did the first leg, and we have a number of additional players that need to play a role in the relay race to run through the finish line. And I see this as the most appealing opportunity to continue to essentially carry the Bitcoin torch forward for a new generation.
I think one of the clearest ways to identify whether SPX is going to be a success is to look at the beginning until now and then try to extrapolate the future out from there. So you look at the beginning holders, and most of them are still here. Most of them have been diamond handed. And then you look at the holders throughout the last couple years, and the majority of those holders, or at least a critical mass of them, have adopted the same kind of values and the same kind of culture of holding. So if we just extrapolate that into the future, and then we look at the new participants, then we can kind of automatically assume that they're going to do the same thing as the previous holders. And I think that's an indicator of what makes SPX the right vehicle, is that it's able to turn people into these hardcore holders. And if it's continuously done this throughout its entire history, then why should it change?
I give so much credit to the OGs for being leaders by example. And just as an example of what some of the OGs have done, they have kept their day jobs to produce income, to live their lives as they have, so that they don't have to sell any SPX. It's that important to them. They could probably, leave their jobs, go sit on a beach, have a cocktail, have fun, but this is too important to them. And so they lead by example. And leading by example is very, very powerful, because if you've ever been part of any team, you know that there are people that level up the team. There are people that behave and operate a certain way to the point where you're like, oh, I don't want to let this person down. Or they're working really, really hard. They're doing really, really hard things. Who am I if I'm the teammate that's sort of dragging the team down? And that is a contagious and infectious culture and attitude that I have seen and witnessed within SPX, is people want to step up and do the hard things and play the hard roles to make this happen. And the people who have gotten us to where we are today have lived that way, like very authentically. And that also is something that builds a lot of trust.
Yeah, I also just want to add, like, if utility is like a vague term as it pertains to currency, and they can be a unit of account, or they can be a medium of exchange, or they can be all of these different things. I think I spend a lot of time in like the tokenization of kind of real world asset, what have you, like kind of the more TradFi oriented view of crypto for like my day job and my day-to-day work. And don't get me wrong, like I think that there's some real kind of merit to that. There's some very interesting components to that. But why can't like a group of people, basically create an investment vehicle whose value kind of comes after the equity? Why can't equity be the initial product, and then the people that you meet around that equity and the mission that is kind of like the source of that token's like kind of appeal for people? Why can't that be an investment shelling point for people? I can see a world, and I had this moment like a month or two ago thinking about SPX. I can see a world where people just altogether stop investing in companies, to be honest, because what is the actual like quote unquote utility of investing in a company for a person? It's realistically to create upside for themselves. And if they can now participate in something that gives them more potential upside, and they're in a social backdrop where that volatility is actually kind of good, and they kind of need that. They need like way more asymmetric upside potential. I could see more and more people moving away from, kind of more traditional investment profiles where, yeah, maybe you get a 10x in 10 years, and that's the best case scenario if you pick the right, like, quote unquote stocks or whatnot. And now people have kind of this alternative. I like to think of them as like decentralized startups, right? But they have these alternative participation vehicles. I think there's like a world of currency potential behind that, but it's different than a medium of exchange. Like I think that Bitcoin is an amazing kind of version of that. I think stable coins are probably right there too. But this I see as slightly different, even though you still can use that as like a secondary utility of the currency itself.
I think one foundational point to make is that people tend to gravitate to the assets that they feel most comfortable holding. We look at where most people put their money in stocks. It's either in the index because they feel where that's most comfortable for them, or it's kind of the top stocks because they've proven themselves over time, and they've shown to be trustworthy in holding. And like you look at gold bugs, like why do they hold gold? Because they feel most comfortable holding that in comparison to like the dollar or whatever else. And then we go to crypto, and like, why do people become Bitcoin maximalists? A large reason of that is because they feel most comfortable holding it. But obviously there is this desire in crypto to like have these asymmetric gains relative to the stock market or other assets. And I think in the crypto market, there's very few coins that people have that comfort of holding. And I think that's what we're trying to create with SPX, and what we've done successfully up until this point when you compare it to, the tens of thousands of other coins being dropped on a daily basis. Like when you look at coins that, people feel comfortable holding it in crypto, there's like a handful of them. So I think the kind of ultimate success is to build SPX into a token that people feel comfortable holding.
Completely agree. And that comes with time. And then also, this is also part of what Murad emphasizes in a lot of the metrics he produces. if Bitcoin is the thing that people take the greatest comfort with holding, because of certain qualities and characteristics that it's emanated, the subsequent things that people will gain comfort holding are things that look like Bitcoin and continue to go the Bitcoin path in earlier stages of Bitcoin's trajectory. So I think like when you look at diamond handedness, full portedness, length of time that coins have been held, the distribution of coins, all these sorts of things, a lot of these characteristics resemble what we saw with Bitcoin at earlier stages in its life cycle. And so I think we're on the right path of getting people to a greater degree of comfort with holding this asset for these reasons, but it still takes a lot of evangelization, education, and quite frankly, like follow through. Just got to follow through, you know?
Yeah, and anyone that is getting priced is panicking at price action right now. They have borrowed conviction. You know, none of the Aons that I talk to are. Look, I couldn't tell you the last time I looked at a chart. The only reason I see the chart is because I have haters in my DMs that send me it. You know, like I don't. That doesn't mean anything. And if you are an Aon that is getting worried here, I would tell you to talk to some of these guys, because their price action cannot make you panic. It should not make you panic. Price action does not dictate growth. It does not measure community strength. It really doesn't. It's something unique to meme coins for sure. But at SPX in particular, you know, the holder count keeps growing. We're in a blood market still, right? Every day there's a new way for them to extract. I mean, look, Trump just did it again for the second time in one cycle. You know what I mean? Like there's that stuff's not going to stop. So price action cannot deter you from the mission. It shouldn't. And if it is, I just truly don't think you understand what we're doing here, you know?
Hey man, I will add one thing to that. Because I totally agree, of course, Manj, but I do think, and I did Country Bitcoin's like Persist Forever episode on Tuesday, and it made me realize something that I think had been brewing in my subconscious that I do think is important. And I do think one thing that I guess downturns in general can be really good for is number one, testing your conviction and kind of helping you build your own over time, kind of seeing, you know, people continue to persist, continue to work, you know, vibes not change. I think that's really important for, you know, I guess newer folks who might get scared, and they have, you know, they generally have like a higher cost basis. They feel more, you know, they have more of a feeling of risk, I think, than people who've been here longer. So I think there's legitimacy to that, but also I think it's very important for, I think, the shaking off of complacency. And I don't mean that in like a chart way. I more mean that socially, because I think you can get to a point where you know, and I agree with Murad's like most recent Persist Forever episode where he feels that we are kind of at critical mass. I do kind of feel that way too, but I also think that we should not, if the consensus is to expect that, people kind of stop doing stuff and then the impact dies. And I don't think that's happening. Don't get me wrong. But I also think that there's such a mind virus here there's so much truth to that it's easy to get kind of caught up in that and be like, you know, okay, wow, like this is the next big thing and I don't have to, you know, it's just going to happen. Right. And I do think that your quote there, Matt, that I know you've tweeted a few times, it's been really impactful and like stuck with me. Like I will follow through is super important. The OGs keeping their jobs super important, right? Like we do have to show up every single day and put in the fucking work to make this a reality, right? Otherwise, you know, it's not to say it won't happen, but we can't expect other people to carry the boats. And I think SPX personally has the highest kind of per capita mentality that aligns with that philosophy and you know, only adds to its kind of tailwinds in general. But I do think that's a very important framing that's easy to kind of get lost in at times.
Yeah, the way that I look at SPX is that it's a belief incubator and a belief magnet, and throughout like all points in price, there's this constant reaccumulation of believers and attrition of disbelievers. So I think the only way that this kind of sorts itself out is that eventually there's more believers then there are disbelievers, and this is how I think we'll get like a constant grind up into the future.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, look at how many, for all of us that were here, I mean, it's all of us, but I guess I'm talking to like the chat as well. Like for all of us that were here, I guess it was like 2 months ago now, when you had all these kind of like mercenary CT figures who were like, SPX is the best chart in crypto type of people. Like I mean, whatever. I understand. Like I understand that they're just like, they're trying to be objective about a series of things that they have no personal attachment to, and that's just not my philosophy. That's not what I'm doing here. But I can't like fault them for thinking that way. But I am. It's important that those people exit. It's important that they don't stick around long. And so I think that that's like a very kind of important transition, like you said, Tans, from I guess non-believers to believers. And as long as the believers persist, then their percentage concentration of like the supply and the voices and all of those things will simply grow.
All right. Any final words, guys?
I'll just say persist forever before my kids start screaming. But yeah, this is a great stream. I appreciate you guys.
Likewise.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for watching. If you haven't already, we'd appreciate if you go subscribe to us on YouTube, Twitch, Spotify, Kick, any of the platforms. Like we really want to try to reach beyond Twitter and kind of get thrust into the algo on these other platforms, because obviously that'll be beneficial for SPX. So yeah, appreciate all of you guys watching, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.
See you guys.
Forever, guys.